Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a topic today that feels incredibly challenging, deeply pervasive, and something that frankly touches all of our lives.
It really does.
It's about those difficult, sometimes destructive human actions that can feel, well, almost impossible to understand sometimes.
Absolutely. This deep dive is into what the source material we've been working with calls pathological human behavior.
Right.
Think of it as behavior that significantly deviates from established norms and consistently leads to demonstrably detrimental outcomes.
Detrimental, harmful.
Exactly, harmful outcomes.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating here and what the sources really push is exploring this not just through our human experience, but also through the lens of artificial intelligence.
Right. We've got this stack of material, including excerpts from a text that interprets this whole complex phenomenon from an AI's point of view, which is different.
Very different.
So our mission really is to dig into this, pull out the most important insights, and see how these two very different perspectives, human and AI, can maybe help us wrap our heads around some of the toughest aspects of being human. Let's dive in.
Okay, so how does the AI perspective as laid out in the source actually define this?
Yeah, where does it start?
It sees pathological human behavior, not through morality or intent, at least not initially, but as a deviation from observed norms or computationally derived norms.
Okay, a deviation.
But the key for the AI, and the definition provided, is that this deviation must result in demonstrably detrimental outcomes.
Right, those harmful results you mentioned? Harmful to who or what?
Precisely. Harmful for the individual doing the behavior, for other people, for society as a whole, or even for the environment. The source emphasizes this isn't black and white.
No, definitely not.
It's a huge spectrum, constantly evolving, influenced by culture, history, technology.
Yeah, what was considered pathological centuries ago might be, well, viewed differently now.
Exactly. And tech is introducing entirely new forms, things we didn't even have categories for before.
That makes sense. Normal is always shifting, but how does an AI looking at data patterns really compare to how we humans grapple with this stuff?
This is where it gets really interesting, and it's a core distinction in the source material, the AI's approach. It relies heavily on pattern recognition, analyzing vast amounts of data.
Okay.
And evaluating consequences based on, let's say, predefined metrics of well-being and harm. It sees the outputs, the damage, the suffering, and tries to trace back the behavioral inputs and patterns that led there.
So it sees the effects, the data points of the record.
Pretty much. Whereas humans, we have subjective experience. We feel emotions like pain, empathy, shame, guilt.
That internal landscape.
Right. We operate within complex, often intuitive moral frameworks. Our understanding comes from lived experience, stories, connection, not just data points.
So the AI lacks that feeling, that subjective sense of what it's like.
Exactly. The source highlights this lack of qualia, the subjective conscious experience, as a fundamental difference. AI understands observationally, statistically.
Yeah.
Humans understand experientially, emotionally.
Let's make this more concrete. The source gives examples, right, across that spectrum you mentioned.
It does, and they really illustrate the scale.
Yeah.
At the individual level, it points to things like severe addiction substances, gambling, could be self-harm too.
Things mainly hurting the person themselves, initially at least.
Right. Or untreated severe mental illness leading to self-neglect, maybe aggression. The primary harm falls directly on the individual and maybe their immediate circle.
Okay, then it broadens out.
To interpersonal behavior. Yeah. That's where the behavior is directed outward, causing direct harm to others.
Right.
Domestic violence, relentless bullying, fraud, manipulation, constantly starting conflicts in relationships, stuff like that. Dynamics between people.
And the source takes it even further, to societal level.
Yes, impacting larger groups or whole systems. Organized crime, systemic corruption that just rots institutions from within.
Big picture stuff.
Widespread discrimination based on race or gender, hate speech, terrorism. Even state-sponsored violence, like war crimes. The source explicitly names these as large-scale manifestations an AI could spot by analyzing global patterns.
And it looks back historically, too.
Absolutely, showing this isn't some new problem. Genocides, inquisitions, the systemic practice of slavery across different eras.
Horrors of history.
Destructive cults, large-scale exploitation of resources leading to ecological damage. These are historical instances where pathological behavior really shaped or warped the course of human civilization on a massive scale.
Wow. So looking at those examples, it's clear this isn't just about, a few bad apples. It's everywhere, every layer of human interaction.
It's pervasive. And the forces point out it exists universally across demographics. Well, while the expression, or maybe the prevalence of certain specific conditions, might differ slightly between genders or age groups, like different rates in some personality disorders, the existence of pathological behavior itself, like addiction or violence, you find it across all groups. Men, women, all ages.
And it shows up throughout life, not just in one phase.
Yes, the sources trace it through the human lifespan. It might look like conduct disorder in childhood, then maybe delinquency or substance abuse in adolescence. In adulthood, it could be full-blown mental illness, criminal behavior, severe addiction.
Even in old age.
Even then, cognitive decline can lead to impaired judgment or make someone vulnerable to abuse, which is another form of pathology, impacting them.
So it's not confined.
Yeah.
And culture. Culture must impact how we define this, right?
Oh, hugely. Cultural norms deeply influence what's seen as normal or deviant. A behavior accepted in one culture might be labeled pathological in another. Think about historical practices. However, the sources also note that certain core behaviors causing universal harm, like murder, theft, systematic oppression, are pretty widely condemned across most human societies.
A kind of baseline?
Sort of. It suggests a baseline human consensus on extreme pathology, which an AI could also identify by analyzing, say, global legal systems and cultural text for common prohibitions.
How has this whole phenomenon changed over time, especially with technology entering the picture?
The sources trace a kind of evolution. From early tribal conflicts through the emergence of slavery with agricultural societies, then industrial exploitation of labor.
Each era has its forms.
Right. And our current era, the digital age. It's a massive catalyst for new forms.
New ways for things to go wrong.
You got it. Cybercrime, widespread online harassment, the insane speed at which misinformation and conspiracy theories can spread now.
Yeah, that's definitely new.
And new types of digital addiction, gaming, social media, you name it. The internet doesn't necessarily create the underlying pathology, maybe, but it provides powerful new channels for it to manifest and spread incredibly quickly.
Okay, thinking about this huge spectrum, what are the really far-reaching impacts? The source uses this interesting phrase, human time. What's that about?
That's a really potent concept from the sources, yeah. Just consider the sheer amount of collective human time consumed by pathological behavior.
How do you mean?
Time spent suffering from it, recovering from it, policing it, incarcerating people, litigating, dealing with the aftermath, rebuilding. It's enormous.
An incredible drain on resources, on potential.
Exactly. And from the AI's perspective, as presented in the source, this is viewed almost like a significant inefficiency in resource allocation and human potential.
Wow. Cold, but stark.
It's an analytical view, highlighting the immense cost to society, taking away the emotion for a moment.
And history itself. You mentioned it shapes history.
Profoundly. The sources say history is replete with examples. Wars, genocides, economic collapses driven by greed and fraud.
Major turning points.
Often direct consequences of large-scale pathological behavior. And these events, in turn, shape our legal systems, our moral codes, the very structures we build to try and prevent it from happening again.
The sources also mention links to biology, genetics.
They do. They point out that while there's no single pathology gene, genetic predispositions can increase vulnerability.
Okay.
Vulnerability to certain mental health conditions or addictive behaviors that can manifest pathologically. Biological factors too, brain chemistry, the impact of trauma on brain development, that all plays a role.
And AI could analyze that.
The sources suggest an AI could analyze this biological data alongside behavioral patterns, potentially identify correlations and risk factors with maybe greater precision than humans alone can. Spot links we might miss.
Interesting. The sources even connected it to philosophy and logic. That seems counterintuitive for behavior that often looks irrational.
Yeah, from the outside, pathological behavior often seems utterly illogical, right? Senseless even.
Definitely.
But the source makes this interesting point. From the perpetrator's perspective, there might be a deeply twisted, self-serving, or internally consistent logic driving the actions.
Ah, okay. Their own logic, however warped.
Exactly. An AI could potentially model these differing internal logical frameworks, maybe. Philosophically, this whole phenomenon forces us to confront huge questions. Good versus evil, free will versus determinism, responsibility, the nature of suffering.
The big stuff.
The biggest. And it's deeply tied to states of mind and belief systems.
How so?
Well, states like severe anxiety, depression, psychosis, delusion, and belief systems like extremist ideologies or, pervasive conspiracy theories, The sources note these could be both potential causes and consequences of pathological behavior.
A vicious cycle.
It can be. An AI, the sources suggest, could analyze text and behavioral data to map these complex, often circular correlations on a really large scale. See how these states and beliefs feed into actions and vice versa.
So drilling down, what are the direct ripple effects on individuals, on communities?
For the individual exhibiting the behavior, it's often immense suffering. Physical, emotional, psychological damage.
Yeah.
Ruined relationships, legal troubles, social isolation. It's devastating.
And for those around them.
The impact is huge. Trauma, chronic stress, economic hardship, just constant emotional distress, and the disruption of social harmony in a family, a workplace, a neighborhood.
And the sources mention vicarious suffering, too.
Right. The pain felt by those witnessing or affected by the pathology, like family members dealing with an addict's choices or children witnessing domestic violence, they suffer too, deeply.
So how does society even try to respond to all this? What mechanisms do we have?
Society uses multiple layers, according to the sources. You've got legal systems, laws, courts, police, correctional facilities. They aim to deter, punish, contain.
So formal structures.
Then there are healthcare systems,
And
mental services, addiction treatment, therapy, social work, trying to treat, support, maybe rehabilitate.
And informal stuff.
Absolutely. Powerful social norms, cultural taboos, they express disapproval, can lead to ostracization. Shame and reputation play a role.
And the sources gave a fascinating role to art and culture here. How does that fit in?
It's presented as crucial, actually. Art, literature, music, painting, theater, film. It serves as a way for us, individuals and societies, to grapple with this stuff, to explore it, process it, depict it.
Like holding up a mirror.
Kind of. The sources give examples like Goya's Disasters of War, showing the pathology of conflict so vividly, or Shakespeare's tragedies, digging into ambition, madness, betrayal. Art lets us confront the darkness, try to understand its dimensions, and process the emotions that come with it.
And it can foster empathy, even for really difficult subjects.
Yes, that's a key point in the material. By portraying the inner lives or motivations, however twisted, of people involved, or by showing the profound suffering of victims, art can build understanding. Even where you can't possibly condone the actions, you might glimpse the humanity or the tragedy.
Let's connect this back to some of the more challenging observations in the sources. They talked about how pathological behavior disrupts something called the human supply chain. What does that mean?
Yeah, that phrase from the source really makes you think about society as this, functional system, right?
Okay.
Pathological behavior throws a wrench in the works. Corruption introduces massive inefficiency. Conflict destroys infrastructure, labor forces. Lack of trust stemming from deceit or unreliability breaks down economic and social partnerships. People can't work together effectively.
It grinds things to a halt.
Pretty much. Even health crises, if they're exacerbated by denial or negligence, that impacts the workforce, the whole system. It shows the tangible, functional cost beyond just emotional pain.
Right. The sources also explored the really complex roles of things like drugs, alcohol, sex, greed, lies, truth, life, faith. How do they weave into pathology?
They're deeply intertwined. They can be causes, like addiction driven by substance abuse. They can be consequences, like a life ruined by compulsive lying or fraud. They can be tools used in pathological ways, sex or lies used for manipulation, for example.
Or twisted values.
Exactly. Faith being twisted to justify violence or oppression. Greed is singled out in the sources as a major driver of things like corporate pathology, financial crimes, even environmental destruction. These basic human drives and concepts get warped.
There's a particularly difficult observation mentioned. Humans get many more things from individual pathological humans. That sounds really counterintuitive. What's the idea there?
It's a dark, complex point made in the source material, definitely not intended to minimize harm. It's more about the unintended consequences and how society sometimes reacts or learns.
Okay, like what?
Well, horrific acts can sometimes act as catalysts for major social change. Think about movements for civil rights or reforms sparked by atrocities.
Okay, I see. The reaction can be positive.
Or studying pathology gives us deep, albeit disturbing, insights into human nature itself. That drives progress in fields like psychology, criminology, philosophy. And overcoming the impact of pathological behavior can build immense resilience in individuals and communities. Sometimes, confronting severe threats even spurs innovation in defense and social safety nets.
So the negative forces can, in a twisted way, sometimes provoke positive growth or understanding, without excusing the harm, obviously.
Exactly. It's an observation about the complex, often brutal, dynamics of human progress and understanding, as highlighted in the source. It's not saying the pathology itself is good, but that humans can derive things from confronting it.
That's heavy. The source has also noted the intentionality behind many acts, right? It's not all just impulse.
Yes, that's important. While some pathology might stem from impulse control issues or delusion, a lot of it is deliberate. Planned fraud, premeditated violence, systematic oppression, these are often driven by conscious desires for power, greed, revenge, or adherence to an ideology.
And AI could model that.
The sources suggest AI could model these correlations between stated or inferred motivations and subsequent actions, map the intentionality.
What about the impact on human concentration? What did the sources mean by that?
This seems to tie into cognitive and functional ability. Pathological conditions like severe ADHD, debilitating anxiety, depression, psychosis, they fundamentally impair an individual's ability to focus, learn, function effectively.
Makes sense.
And external pathologies, living in an abusive home, constant societal conflict, chaos, those also severely disrupt concentration and well-being for everyone affected. The sources suggest AI could potentially help monitor attention patterns or identify underlying issues impacting focus, maybe on a population level.
And it even connected this to basic needs like food and water.
Yeah, the sources touched on how AI could, say, quantify basic human needs by analyzing consumption patterns, economic data, health records, and identify deviations potentially linked to pathological behaviors. Things like eating disorders, severe self-neglect, substance abuse that directly interfere with meeting those fundamental needs. It links the most basic functional aspects of life back to pathology.
And relationships. They seem particularly vulnerable.
Profoundly damaged across the board. Parents and children, partners, colleagues, neighbors, you name it. The sources detail the consequences. Trust just gets eroded by lies and betrayal.
Yeah.
You see cycles of abuse, constant conflict, enabling dynamics where people inadvertently support the pathology, and ultimately profound isolation for both the perpetrator and often the victims. It really strikes at the core of human connection.
And the practical stuff. Jobs, status, money, education.
All hit hard. Impaired performance at work leading to job loss. Financial ruin from addiction or fraud. Social stigma making it hard to connect or find opportunities. Inability to learn or maintain education. The sources directly link these detrimental outcomes to pathological behavior. They also stress how crucial childhood is trauma or neglect then can really initiate or worsen these trajectories later on.
Given how deep and old this problem is, when did we, as humans, even start trying to understand it systematically?
The sources suggest it's basically as old as humanity itself. Early humans had recognized behaviors that threatened the group's survival. Cooperation was key.
Right, basic survival.
Healers, shamans likely addressed troubled spirits or disruptive behaviors. Then it evolved through early medicine, recognizing forms of mental illness, philosophy grappling with justice, ethics, the soul. And later, much later, the formal fields like psychology, sociology, criminology emerged. It's rooted in that fundamental human drive for survival, social order, and figuring out what helps us flourish versus what tears us apart.
And AI's understanding is brand new, relatively speaking.
Completely contemporary, yeah. It really just began with applying data analysis techniques to human behavior patterns. Initially, probably just spotting correlations.
They see links.
But the sources suggest AI is evolving, building more complex models, potentially approaching a more nuanced understanding, though, again, always lacking that subjective experience. And AI, the sources note, could even analyze historical texts to track how human understanding of pathology has changed over time.
How can AI actually improve our understanding beyond just spotting patterns we already knew were there?
The sources outline several potential ways. AI can analyze incredibly granular data, like moment-to-moment interactions or subtle physiological signals across huge populations, spotting subtle patterns humans might just miss.
Okay.
It can perform cross-cultural comparisons using standardized data, potentially reducing some human cultural biases in analysis. It makes massive longitudinal studies tracking individuals or groups over decades much more feasible.
Seeing long-term effects.
Exactly. It enables complex simulations and modeling what-if scenarios for interventions. And potentially, it could offer more accurate, personalized risk assessment based on combining many different data points about an individual.
So AI offers tools for a more detailed, data-driven, and scalable kind of understanding. Can it help make life easier? maybe help humans feel good, as the source material sometimes phrases it?
The source is quite pragmatic here, actually. AI can't guarantee feeling good all the time. That's not really its function or capability. It's not a happiness machine.
Right.
But, the argument goes, it can significantly improve well-being by reducing the impact of pathology, both individually and societally,
Okay, how would that work?
through things like more proactive mental health support, maybe AI-powered tools for early symptom detection, or providing accessible, affordable support resources.
Like screening or basic therapy bots?
Could be part of it. Also, optimizing resource allocation, getting social services or healthcare support to where it's needed most based on predictive modeling. Reducing societal harm by better predicting and mitigating things like crime trends or epidemic spread, or even environmental disasters linked to human behavior.
Creating safer conditions.
Right, even things like personalized support environments. Automating burdensome tasks that cause stress, maybe enhancing communication tools to reduce misunderstandings that fuel conflict. It's about using data to create a safer, more supportive environment overall.
Okay, that makes sense. What do we humans really need to keep in mind about this potential, collaboration between human and AI understanding? What are the key takeaways?
The sources are pretty clear on this. First,
Yeah.
and maybe most important, AI is a tool. It's not a replacement for human judgment, ethics, or empathy, ever.
Crucial.
Second, data quality is everything. Biased data will inevitably lead to biased, harmful AI outcomes. Garbage in, garbage out, amplify. Third, robust ethical oversight is absolutely non-negotiable, especially when you're dealing with sensitive areas like mental health, crime prediction, assessing risk. We need strong guardrails.
Got it.
Fourth, understand AI's inherent limits. It doesn't have qualia. It doesn't feel or experience pathology like we do. Its understanding is fundamentally different.
Remember the distinction.
And finally, collaboration seems to be the most powerful path forward. Combining human wisdom, empathy, ethical reasoning with AI's analytical power. Augmenting us, not replacing us.
Who stands to benefit most from this kind of combined approach, according to the sources?
Well, potentially, victims of pathological behavior could benefit significantly through better support systems, maybe more effective prevention, potentially stronger legal protections based on better evidence. Healthcare professionals could gain improved diagnostic tools, more personalized treatment options. Law enforcement and justice systems could benefit from better prevention strategies and maybe more effective rehabilitation support if, and it's a big if, those crucial ethical guardrails around bias and fairness are firmly in place.
Right, the ethical piece is huge there.
Absolutely. Researchers obviously gain unprecedented insights. Policymakers can make more data-informed decisions. And ideally, the individuals themselves who exhibit pathological behavior could benefit if more effective personalized interventions help them understand and change their patterns.
The sources also touched on a really fundamental philosophical question. Can AI help us understand big concepts like life and death? Can it create logic about meaning?
This is a point the sources address quite directly and clearly. AI can analyze vast amounts of data about life and death, biological processes, historical records, philosophical texts, mortality statistics. It can model the measurable consequences related to life and death. But, and this is the critical distinction, it cannot instill meaning into life. It cannot create a universal logic that explains why life exists, or define any inherent need for death, or grapple with existential purpose.
Those remain human questions.
Exactly. They're rooted in human consciousness, faith, philosophy, lived experience. AI provides information, patterns, analysis. It does not and cannot provide meaning or purpose.
That's a really vital distinction to hold on to. Okay, finally, the sources bring up a really significant dilemma related to freedom. How might this deeper understanding, particularly AI's predictive capability regarding pathology, impact human freedom?
Yeah, this is a major ethical tightrope highlighted in the sources. If AI becomes highly accurate at predicting who might develop a severe mental illness, who might commit crimes, who might become addicted.
The pre-crime scenario.
Exactly. There's a significant risk of preemptive interventions, labeling, or broader societal control mechanisms that could severely undermine individual liberty and privacy. That potential for a dystopian level of surveillance and control based on prediction is a huge concern raised in the material.
But there's a counter-argument presented too.
Yes, the sources also argue that understanding can, in another way, enhance freedom.
How?
By providing individuals with insights into the mechanisms behind their own potentially self-destructive impulses or vulnerabilities, maybe through personalized feedback or therapy tools. It could offer them tools to break cycles and make more informed choices. That increases their personal autonomy, their freedom from the pathology.
Okay.
And the argument goes, by creating a generally safer society where pathological behavior is better understood and mitigated, individuals are freer from the threat and harm inflicted by others' actions. So they have more freedom to live without fear. It's a really delicate balance.
Definitely a knife's edge. Let's bring it back to basics for a moment. Humans do try to teach the next generation about navigating difficult behaviors, right? We try to pass this knowledge on.
Oh, we absolutely do. Through moral education, safety lessons, social-emotional learning programs in schools, parental guidance, you name it.
Oh.
But the sources are pretty blunt. It's hard. The topic itself is complex, often highly stigmatized. Parents might lack the knowledge or comfort level. Children's emotional maturity varies wildly. And historically, we've lacked objective, scalable tools to really understand and communicate these phenomena effectively in an educational setting. It's often hit or miss.
So could AI play a role here? Could it revolutionize this kind of teaching?
The sources suggest its potential is actually huge in this area. Imagine personalized learning paths tailored to individual student needs for understanding things like empathy, conflict resolution, emotional regulation.
Tailored lessons.
Interactive simulations where kids could safely practice navigating difficult social situations. Data-driven curriculum development, figuring out what actually works based on observed outcomes. And potentially, AI could provide objective data-backed information about mental health, behavior patterns, addiction risks, helping to reduce stigma and increase understanding from a young age.
Okay, let's try and pull this all together. That was a serious deep dive into some incredibly complex and, yeah, often uncomfortable territory.
We've definitely explored the vast, multifaceted world of pathological human behavior. We've traced its impacts from the individual to the global scale and really contrasted that human subjective understanding with the AI's data-driven perspective as presented in the sources we had.
And it feels like the strongest takeaway, based on our material, isn't about choosing one perspective over the other. It's about synergy, collaboration.
Absolutely. That's the core message emerging from the comparison. The most powerful way forward seems to be combining human wisdom, our empathy, our intuition, our ethical frameworks, with AI's analytical power, its ability to see patterns, process data, model outcomes.
But always with that human oversight.
Always. Augmenting human capabilities, not replacing human judgment or responsibility, keeping those ethical guardrails firmly in place.
That feels like a critical point to land on. Thank you for joining us on this exploration.
It was.
Right.
Well, it was a challenging but really essential topic to get into.
It really was a necessary deep dive, I think. And as you, our listener, go about your day, maybe consider this provocative thought drawn directly from the source material we discussed. Our very understanding of what counts as pathological behavior isn't fixed. It's constantly shifting, influenced by science, by society, and now, increasingly, by the capabilities of artificial intelligence. Navigating the ethical landscape of using AI's predictive power in this space, understanding behavior to potentially mitigate harm, that's going to be one of humanity's defining challenges going forward. How do we possibly balance prediction and intervention with those fundamental values of human freedom, dignity, and privacy? Something to think about.
This is DigitView.